7 years, she never asked for anything in return, she was simply there. When Riku Miura first stepped onto Canadian soil at just 17 years old, what waited for her wasn't glory, medals, or even the ice itself. Waiting for her was a 64-year-old Japanese woman. Born in Kobe, educated at the University of Toronto, married to a Canadian husband and quietly settled in Oakville, this woman had no official title, no contract, no salary, and no obligation. Yet for 7 long years, she remained beside Riku Miura and Ryuichi Kihara. And the question of why she stayed beside them for so long is what this entire story is truly about. The world called their gold medal performance at the 2026 Milan-Cortina Olympics a miracle. A breathtaking free skate score of 158.13. A total score of 231.2. They climbed from 5th place after the short program all the way to the top of the podium. In the instant they completed that impossible comeback, the entire arena froze. Reporters stopped typing. Fans stopped breathing. Even the commentators lost their words. But what looked like a miracle to the world was actually something built slowly over years. Years of sacrifice. Years of winter mornings in Oakville. Years of hospital visits. Years of late-night dinners after exhausting practices. And at the center of all those invisible moments stood one woman named Carno Momo. This is not a story about medals. It's not even about records. This is the story of why one woman devoted 7 years of her life to 2 young Japanese skaters she didn't even know. And it's the story of how those 7 years quietly helped create the phenomenon the world now calls Rikuryu. Let's go back to 2019. At the time, Ryuichi Kihara was already carrying the weight of disappointment. Previous partnerships had failed, and his future in pair skating looked uncertain. Pair skating is unlike any other discipline. Skill alone is not enough. Timing, trust, body movement, personality, and emotional chemistry all have to connect perfectly. And after several painful setbacks, Kihara understood that better than anyone. His partnership with Narumi Takahashi had ended, other attempts had fallen apart, and while working part-time jobs, he searched desperately for one final opportunity. At 26 years old, he knew time was running out for him as a pair skater. The pressure had to be enormous, but the remarkable thing about Ryuichi Kihara was that he never showed that panic on the surface. Meanwhile, Riku Miura was only 17. Raised in Hokkaido, she had begun to see the limitations of pair skating in Japan. Compared to singles skating, the environment was nowhere near as developed. There were fewer coaches, fewer partners, fewer opportunities, and far less support. If she truly wanted to compete against the world's best, there was only one choice left. She had to leave Japan. Years later, she admitted, "I was scared, but I felt like I had no choice except to go." That sentence sounds simple, but we should never underestimate the courage behind it. Imagine being 17 years old, leaving your parents behind, moving alone to a foreign country where you don't fully understand the language or culture, and trying to build a future from nothing. That decision demanded a level of loneliness and determination most people will never experience. Neither of them had anything left to lose. Kihara was risking the final years of his competitive career. Miura was risking a future that had not even begun yet. And in August 2019, those two crossed paths and officially formed the partnership the world would eventually know as Rikuryu. But the beginning was far from smooth. Their age difference, their personalities, their skating styles, and the challenge of communication created constant obstacles. Becoming a real team took time. It took friction. And more than anything, it required someone quietly watching over them from the outside. That place was Oakville, a peaceful town about 30 minutes from Toronto. Safe neighborhoods, lakeside walking paths, family shopping centers, and a modest Japanese community made it a comfortable place to live. And among that community was Carno Momo. Very little is publicly known about why she moved to Canada in the first place. But one thing is certain: earning a doctorate from the University of Toronto speaks volumes about her intelligence and determination. She built a life overseas, married, settled down, and by the age of 64 had already completed most of life's major chapters. She had stability. She had peace. So why would someone like her suddenly become a caretaker for 2 young skaters from Japan? She reportedly became involved with Miura and Kihara shortly after they formed their partnership. At first, it may have simply been a connection within the local Japanese community, but the relationship quickly became much deeper than that. At some point, Riku Miura began calling her "my Canadian mother." And the fact that the nickname naturally stuck says everything about the bond they had built. One of the most important things Carno did for them was helping during medical emergencies. For foreigners living in Canada, navigating hospitals and healthcare systems can be incredibly overwhelming. The language barrier alone can make even small problems terrifying. When Miura became sick or injured during training, Carno drove them to hospitals, helped with paperwork, waited with them for hours and stayed beside them no matter how late it became. Some people may hear this and simply think, she was a kind person. But stop and truly think about the situation. An 18-year-old athlete becomes ill in the middle of the night. Her parents are thousands of miles away in Japan. Calling home means waking them up in another time zone. Practice starts early the next morning. Team staff live elsewhere, and yet there was someone in Oakville who would answer the phone and say, "I'm coming right now." Carno was not an official staff member. She wasn't employed by the federation. She wasn't even a professional support worker. She was simply a Japanese woman living in Canada. There was no contract, no obligation, no reward waiting for her. And still, she showed up every single time. There is only one word I can think of to explain that kind of behavior: love. But even then, it's difficult to define exactly what kind of love it was. Was it love for those two athletes? Love for young Japanese people far from home? Or maybe love for the sport itself? Perhaps even Carno herself never fully knew the answer. There is one theory I cannot stop thinking about. Maybe when Carno looked at Riku Miura, she saw a younger version of herself. After all, Carno had also once left Japan to build a life in Canada. She had experienced the loneliness of being far from home, the nights where language failed, the mornings filled with cultural confusion, the moments where you desperately miss Japanese food. Or want to call someone back home just to hear a familiar voice. So when she saw a 17-year-old girl arrive alone in Canada, chasing an impossible dream, perhaps something moved inside her. Maybe consciously, maybe unconsciously, she felt the desire to become the mother figure she herself once needed. There is no proof of this, but 7 years is too long to explain away without emotion. Nobody dedicates 7 years of their life to something without their heart being involved. And it wasn't only Miura who depended on her. Ryuichi Kihara also quietly leaned on Carno's support. Kihara once admitted that whenever problems arose in Canada, she was there to help them. For a man rebuilding his career from zero in a foreign country, simply having a trustworthy adult nearby must have carried enormous emotional weight. Kihara is known as someone who rarely complains. He hides weakness. He always positions himself as the protector, the one responsible for holding everything together. His famous words, "Maybe I should keep checking things for both of us," perfectly capture that personality. But even someone strong like him still needed support. And deep inside his relationship with Carno, there were moments where he himself was being protected. The strongest people are often the ones who most desperately need someone standing quietly behind them. They simply never say it out loud. It wasn't just the coaches who created that feeling of safety. At the very root of it all was the quiet presence of Carno Momo. So when Riku Miura later said, "If Carno-san hadn't been there, we never would have made it this far," those words carried real memories behind them. There were nights when she became sick and Carno-san rushed over immediately. There were competitions where anxiety made sleep impossible, and Carno simply sat there listening. Whenever life in Canada became overwhelming, there was always someone they could rely on. None of those moments directly improved their skating skills, but indirectly they changed everything. Because when you can sleep peacefully at night, you can give everything you have at practice the next morning. When you know there's someone waiting to help you during difficult moments, your heart doesn't collapse under pressure. And little by little, over 7 years, those invisible moments eventually became 158.13 points on Olympic ice. Before the Olympics, coach Bruno Marcotte's training was brutal. Every practice pushed them to their absolute limit. There were terrible days filled with injuries. Nights where exhaustion became so overwhelming that words could no longer describe it. And during those moments, the simple act of going home carried enormous meaning. Because home meant there was someone there waiting, someone willing to listen. And sometimes that alone is enough to help a person wake up the next morning and start again. Carno Momo became one of the people who created that warmth of home for them in Oakville. In sports, the relationship between coaches and athletes is usually functional. Everything revolves around a goal: getting stronger, improving technique, winning medals. But Carno's relationship with Miura and Kihara was different. There was no objective behind it, no expectation, no transaction. She simply listened. She simply stayed beside them. She simply cared. And strangely enough, that simple part became the emotional rest their hearts desperately needed. In a foreign country like Canada, Carno created moments where Riku Miura and Ryuichi Kihara could stop being elite athletes for a little while and just exist as normal people again. Kihara cooked curry in a pressure cooker. Miura made omurice. Kihara bought a rice cooker that Miura barely used. Together they wandered through shopping malls, picked out clothes and looked at cosmetics like ordinary young adults. And through those small everyday moments, the life known as Rikuryu slowly became normal for them. Carno was always somewhere around the edges of that daily life. Sometimes she shared meals with them. Sometimes she solved problems. Sometimes she did absolutely nothing except stay nearby. And the value of simply being nearby is something no statistic can ever measure. But Miura and Kihara understood that value perfectly. Which is why when they say, without Kano-san, those words are not just expressions of gratitude, they are confessions. Confessions that they could not have done this completely alone. That somewhere along the journey they needed someone, and that someone was Carno Momo. And yet before this video, most people watching probably had never even heard her name. The entire world knows the names Riku Miura and Ryuichi Kihara. Fans know coach Bruno Marcotte, they know choreographers, they know costume designers. Those names appear in interviews, broadcasts and articles, but Carno Momo's name almost never appeared anywhere. Why? Because modern sports media only highlights things that can be measured. Scores, statistics, coaching achievements, medal counts, records, but Carno's 7 years cannot be turned into numbers. How many late-night hospital visits did she make? How many hours did she spend listening at the dinner table? How many quiet moments of support did she give them? There are no statistics for those things, no official records, which means they are rarely acknowledged. But think about it carefully. Aren't the most important forms of support in life usually the ones that cannot be measured? When someone thanks their parents, do they count how many meals were cooked for them? Do they calculate how many sleepless nights their mother stayed awake worrying about them? What Carno Momo gave to Miura and Kihara may have belonged to that same category of love, something existing completely outside of calculation. 7 years that never became numbers. And if Carno was one of the reasons Riku Miura didn't break emotionally after moving to Canada at 18. If she was one of the reasons Ryuichi Kihara managed to restart his career from the edge of collapse and continue fighting for 7 more years, then that contribution may never appear inside training logs or performance data, but it absolutely existed. And eventually, all of that invisible emotional support transformed itself into a visible number, 158.13. This is why I want to return to something Ryuichi Kihara once said. He joked, maybe I'll keep checking things for both of us from now on. And honestly, it fit their relationship perfectly. Kihara constantly checked Miura's forgotten belongings, organized their luggage, and paid attention to the tiny details of everyday life. Miura once casually threw an Olympic gold medal into her backpack like it was nothing. That's the kind of person she is. And Kihara spent years quietly looking after her. That became one of the foundations of their partnership. But here's the part most people never noticed. Even Kihara himself was being watched over by someone else. Carno Momo was quietly checking on him too. Was he overworking himself? Was he mentally exhausted? Was he eating properly? Was the pressure becoming too heavy? These were not things coaches could always see. They were the kinds of struggles only visible to someone standing close to daily life itself. And Carno saw those things. Miura was being protected by Kihara. And Kihara in turn was being protected by Carno. Perhaps this invisible chain of care is what truly allowed Rikuryu to survive for 7 straight years. Behind the glamorous performances and Olympic moments, there existed this quiet system of support nobody ever saw. Layers of love hidden beneath the podium itself. Then came the 2022 Beijing Olympics, and the silver medal that changed everything. For the first time in history, Japanese pair skating stood on the Olympic podium. The entire world finally recognized the existence of Rikuryu. But even after winning silver, frustration remained inside both of them, because silver meant they were close, painfully close, not gold, just almost, and that almost became the fuel that drove the next 4 years of their lives. After Beijing, they returned to Oakville and went straight back to work. Training became even harsher. Bruno Marcotte raised the demands higher and higher, greater precision, higher difficulty, no room for mistakes. Every single day on the ice felt suffocating with pressure. And through all 4 of those difficult years, Carno Momo remained there exactly as she always had been. Before the silver medal and after the silver medal, nothing about her changed. She didn't suddenly treat them differently because they became famous. She didn't abandon them after failures either. She simply stayed there beside them, exactly the same as before. And honestly, the value of someone who never changes becomes even more important after success arrives, because success changes everything else around you. Attention grows. Expectations become heavier, pressure multiplies. After Beijing, Rikuryu's popularity exploded internationally. Interviews increased, events increased, social media followers skyrocketed. Suddenly, the entire world was watching them. And during all that chaos, Carno Momo remained the one constant presence that never changed. Even in figure skating, a gap like that is incredibly hard to overcome. Commentators said it, media outlets wrote it, but Riku Miura and Ryuichi Kihara refused to give up. Why? Because it wasn't only about technique, it was about years of emotional foundation beneath them. The heartbreak of Beijing had become fuel. Daily training, life in Oakville, Carno Momo's dinner table, Kihara's curry, Miura's omuris, shopping trips at the mall, late-night hospital visits and smiling photos together, all of it had built something inside them that simply would not break. Then the free skate began. The moment Miura entered her jump, Rikyu fans around the world held their breath. She landed it perfectly. Then came the lift. Kihara raised her high into the air and brought her down with complete control. Twist lift. Death spiral, the final sequence, everything connected, and when the performance ended, Kihara closed his eyes. Miura held his hand, then the score appeared, 158.13, a total of 231.2, a historic score, a gold medal, a comeback, a miracle. But somewhere in Oakville, one 64-year-old woman was watching that miracle alone on television. Carno Momo. Nobody asked what she felt in that moment. And perhaps she would never speak about it openly. But maybe in that instant, 7 years of memories rushed back all at once. The hospital waiting rooms at midnight, the exhausted faces after practice, the silent nights when they came home after everything went wrong, their expressions after winning silver in Beijing, and now gold. The weight of those memories may have been equal to the medal itself, maybe even heavier. On April 28, 2026, at the Japan National Press Club in Tokyo, Miura and Kihara sat side by side for their retirement press conference. Kihara was crying, Miura was smiling. Many media outlets focused on that contrast, the man in tears, the woman with a smile, the answer to 7 years together. But there was another perspective many people missed. Maybe Ryuichi Kihara wasn't only crying because he was saying goodbye to Riku Miura as a partner. Maybe he was also saying goodbye to Oakville, goodbye to 7 years of ordinary days, goodbye to winter mornings, lakeside walks, shopping malls, pressure cooker curry, and the daily life that included Carno Momo. When you see it that way, the weight of Kihara's tears feels different. At the press conference, Miura said, "Thank you for pairing with me." Those words were meant for Kihara, but perhaps somewhere inside that thank you there was also gratitude for Carno. Gratitude that never became a sentence. Gratitude for someone who wasn't sitting in that room. Gratitude for the woman who stayed beside them for 7 years without asking for anything. When Miura spoke those words, I would not be surprised if Carno's face appeared somewhere in her heart. Kaori Sakamoto later said that when she saw Ryuichi crying, she couldn't help laughing. That laugh was not mockery. It was surprise, warmth, and recognition all at once. After 7 years of acting strong, the man who always held everything together finally broke down. And maybe when Carno saw Kihara's tears, she smiled before she cried too. A smile that said, "You finally let yourself cry." A smile that said, "You were holding it in for so long." Only someone who had watched him closely for 7 years could understand that kind of smile. During the retirement press conference, a reporter asked the two about their relationship. Miura and Kihara laughed and replied, "We'll leave that to your imagination." Then Miura added something even more powerful, "I would absolutely never continue with another partner." That was not a casual statement. In normal retirement situations, athletes might say, "I'm not thinking about it right now," or "I don't know what the future holds." But Miura said, "Absolutely never." And the word absolutely does not come from logic, it comes from emotion. So we have to ask what existed deep inside her heart. After spending 7 years with Ryuichi Kihara, what would it mean for Riku Miura to skate with someone else? This is not just a technical question, it is emotional. It means being held by someone else's hands, trusting someone else's timing, being lifted by someone else's strength, having someone else check your bags, protect your details, and quietly care for you. Maybe that is why the phrase absolutely never came out so clearly. Because to Miura, replacing Kihara was not simply difficult, it was impossible. And Carno Momo understood the weight of that absolutely better than almost anyone. She had watched their trust grow from the closest possible distance for 7 years. So when Miura said she would never continue with another partner, perhaps Carno nodded more deeply than anyone else. After retiring, Miura and Kihara returned to Canada, not as competitors anymore but simply as two people away from the ice. And still they returned to Oakville. That fact was overlooked by many people. After retirement, wouldn't it be natural to go back to Japan? Their families are there, their friends are there, their language and culture are there. But they went back to Canada because their place to return to was there. Their families may be in Japan. Their competitive stage may have belonged to Japan and the world, but their 7 years of everyday life were in Oakville. The familiar streets were there, the lakeside paths were there, the mall they knew was there, and Carno was there. The fact that they chose Oakville even after leaving competition proves that the town was never just a training base. It was home. And one of the people who helped make it home was Carno Momo. Home is not just a building, home is people. What makes a place feel like home is whether there is someone there who makes you want to return. For Miura and Kihara, Oakville felt like home because Carno was there. And even after the competition ended, that feeling did not disappear. That is why they went back. The details of their lives in Oakville after retirement have not been made public. But perhaps there is still an ordinary rhythm there. Kihara making curry, Miura making omurice, the two of them going to the mall, sharing meals with Carno. Only now, without the crushing pressure of competition, maybe the laughter at the table feels lighter. A dinner table filled with 7 years of shared memories. Not exactly family by blood, but something that may be even harder to define, people connected by time, trust, care, and countless invisible moments. So let me leave you with one final question. Did Carno Momo ever ask anything from them? Probably not. She did not ask for medals, she did not ask for public gratitude, she did not ask for money, she did not ask for attention. She only stayed beside them, that was all. But simply staying beside someone is one of the hardest things in the world. To remain unchanged for 7 years through success and failure, Olympic nights and hospital emergencies, that consistency is the truth of who Carno Momo was to them. People change, relationships change, success changes the people around you. But according to Miura and Kihara's own words, Carno did not change. And in a foreign country, having one person who remains the same can become the very root of safety. Maybe you heard the name Carno Momo for the first time today. But when we talk about the 7-year story of Riku Miura and Ryuichi Kihara, her name cannot be left out. She was the woman behind the gold medal, the woman who waited with them in hospital rooms, the woman who stood nearby without asking for anything. When the world talks about Rikuryu, it talks about scores, technique, and emotion. But far fewer people talk about the 64-year-old Japanese woman in Oakville who quietly supported them for 7 years. This video was made to tell that hidden truth, their Canadian mother. Because she was there, Rikuryu made it this far, and maybe that is the whole story.